Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining and welcome. Today I will be speaking about event photography, and to start, my name is Lauren Shigaris. I am one of the original co-founders of Blue Hour Photo Ventures, and right now I am both pursuing photography and a career in tech. So I am studying data science at Boston University. That really bridges my creative intuition and technical analysis, which I think will come into play here during my presentation. I specialize in weddings, concerts, and conferences, really any events, but my passion really lies in weddings especially. So I want to talk about what the overlap is between photography and data science. So, like data science, photography is all about data. So, if you're anything like me, you may have a hard time coming to grips with having deleted old photos that nowadays we maybe could have saved. So, I am having some regrets there, but today I want to talk about why we should move forward in a way where we're always conserving and archiving our photos. Deleting old raw files really, in a way, is like cutting corners because you could have bought a new hard drive. In the past, I personally have deleted some of my old photos, and looking back, I don't know why I did. I mean, I guess I just thought they would never be used, which is a normal train of thought. But nowadays, looking back, really, it seems like any photo can be saved, and I will prove that in this presentation a little bit later. So first, I'm going to jump into JPEG versus RAW, and I'm sure you probably have heard about the difference, but I really want to stress that when you shoot JPEG, your camera makes permanent decisions about the color and contrast, and then it deletes the rest of the information to save space. But when you shoot RAW, you keep every single photon the sensor captured. So as a data scientist, I need that raw input. We can't use AI to enhance a photo effectively if the compression artifacts are already baked in to the photo. So now I'm going to be talking about event photography. So as you might know, event photography is pretty chaotic. In studio photography, it's pretty easy to control your environment. You just move the light around. Everything is very intentional, and you have 100% leeway of how that photo comes out. At an event though, you really can't control much. I mean, if you're lucky, you could ask the event organizer or the person who hired you to adjust the lights, dim them, or make them brighter, turn certain lights off, turn certain lights on. But usually you don't really have that type of control because usually it'll be at a space where everything is kind of planned out. In events, you really need to be acting as a documentarian. Because I can't ask a band, for example, at a concert to hold that pose while I lower the shutter speed, I have to bump up my ISO, and that is where our data problems begin. As you might know, certain cameras don't do as well in low light. But what I will absolutely stress is don't stress. I think the best thing that you can do upon arrival or as the scenes are changing is just take an extra minute to get your settings right, because sometimes when there's a lot going on, it's easy to get flustered by the energy of the room, and you might feel like you're missing a certain moment and you want to run over there and just start shooting, but really take a moment to pause, regain composure, and get those settings perfect, because if you don't, you might regret it later. This is a little bit hard to do, but it's essential. Sometimes the wedding planner is pointing at their watch or the band is starting and you just feel that pressure, but don't. As I said, take the extra 60 seconds to dial in your exposure. A delayed photo is annoying for a minute, but then the client will forget. A bad photo is annoying forever. So another thing that I will go into in terms of kind of the soft skills of photography is definitely read the room. I call this the chameleon approach, where sometimes you just want to match the energy of the crowd. If they're stressed, don't act stressed, but try to act calm and quiet. If they need help, offer to help. But overall, just try to be good energy. And this even starts before the photo shoot. If you feel like you're not in the best mood and you're going to show up to a photo shoot, go for a walk, go for a run, spend time with your pets or your loved ones, and try to get that good energy channel, because that will actually reflect in your photography. And I will say, when you start getting your camera out, sometimes people, especially if they don't have any drinks in them, they could get a little bit stiff or awkward. Some people really just don't like being photographed. So try to get as many smiles as you can, but if you find that they're really kind of trying to turn away from the camera, read that energy and move on, because there's someone else who will want to be in front of the camera. If it's like a serious moment or like an intimate speech at like a wedding rehearsal dinner, just try to be a fly on the wall. I will explain in a little bit about one of the rehearsal dinners that I did, where at first I was not using a flash. It turned out that I really needed to use the flash, but at first I was just trying to be super, hidden. And sometimes you do need to have that flash, be seen, just go all in on the moment, and just try not to feel like you're in the way, because you were hired for a reason. And another thing I'll say, and the last thing about the soft skills, is definitely don't hesitate to drop the camera and introduce yourself. Not only is this a good networking opportunity, but when people feel like they know you a little bit, or you've been able to connect with them, they're a lot more likely to be loose and comfortable in front of the camera and kind of be themselves. And that's where the magic of photography really happens. I will now speak about one of the wedding rehearsal dinners that I did. Now, in this scenario, this was definitely a small venue, which was in Salem, Mass. For this one specifically, I like to describe it as I was the hunter. So I kept my flash in my bag. I was really hunting the good light on the faces. And what I did was, because we were in a room full of windows and the bar was kind of dark with artificial light, I stood by the windows with my back to the windows. So everyone who had their face pointed to the window had great light on them, and I was able to get some really great shots. So as we know, natural light is the most flattering most of the time. So that was my strategy. Otherwise, there were these really kind of orangey lights that just didn't look good. Now for the next examples, these are interesting because we do have the artificial light on one side. For the photo on the left, we can see the artificial light on the right of her face, and on the photo on the right, we can see the artificial light on the left, which looks pretty orange, and then the light coming from the window is very blue. So this type of photo with the mixed lighting, as some of you may know, it can be very challenging to edit. I was able to save everything in the shadows, but for example, her blonde hair, it was just so bright on her blonde hair that some of those details did blow out. But overall, it's about the moments. Usually in event photography, it's the little moments that matter more than the actual technical part about it. People would rather have a really amazing photo of themselves that's not technically perfect than a boring moment that is technically perfect. So I would focus more on the moments and the energy, and then the technical stuff second, if you can. Here's an example where I had that natural light on the people, and I think they look really great. And it's just much easier to get technically good shots when you have your back facing to the window. the people's faces towards the window. And yeah. So now I'm going to show you another example that is completely different, also a wedding rehearsal dinner. So I call this scenario B, and this is because I was balancing the flash that I had with the tungsten lights from the ceilings. So the tungsten lights create a very orangey shadow in everyone's faces. The goal here is to match the grandeur of the event. The other one was more intimate, more soft, natural light. This one is more hard light, a little more dramatic. These photos on the left, I was not using flash. So usually what I do, even if I'm not going to use the photos, what I do when I first get out my camera is I do not use a flash. People first need to see the camera and get comfortable with the idea of getting photographed before they have these flashes going off in their faces left and right. So as we can see on the left, while these are very nice moments, they kind of look, pixelated, and I like to say a little mushy, definitely very orange, and very hard to edit. Because if I were to add in blues, technically I guess I could do local edit where I'm just editing the people, but if I'm adding in blues, then the background is going to be completely blue. So I try to get it balanced as best I can. I try to get the whites white, but it's not always going to work out like that. The photos on the right, these were taken with my flash, and you can see that they're just much more technically on point. Nothing looks very pixelated, and it's very easy to edit these types of photos, which will save you time down the line. So the golden rule that I've learned is always pack the flash, even if you swear you won't use it. There have been many times where I've had, as an example, like an engagement shoot that was supposed to be around, just before sunset starting. And it just depends on the location that you're in, whether it's indoor, outdoor. Sometimes even outdoors will be the sun behind a building, and you thought, oh, well, there was sun, but oh, wait, there's a tall building exactly where we're standing, so that light doesn't come through. And so I've learned no matter what the situation is, even if it weighs you down a bit, always pack the flash. One of the case studies that I'm going to speak about today is my experience at the Boston Public Library. I shot a wedding there, which was absolutely amazing. It was super elegant. It really was a dream, and I'm very honored to have been chosen for this specific event. But to be honest, this location is an absolute nightmare to photograph in. You have these really warm orange library lamps, and it's very dark in some areas, very bright in some other areas. And the ceremony itself was actually completely at night, which was held here right in the courtyard, but shortly after this photo was taken. So it was a lot darker. So when you're shooting in conditions like this, it actually really confuses the camera sensor. I do make a conscious decision in camera. For an event like this, I'm always shooting on the most megapixels that I have. Really, for any of the most important events or photography gigs that I get, I'm always shooting on the highest amount of megapixels because I want the leeway in editing later. I never know if I'm going to need it, even if it seems like I might not need it. This was such an important event. I had to go 50 megapixels. So when I try to accurately expose my camera in conditions where things are very dark and light at the same time, you have shadows, the bright lights, or even if it's just kind of like dark in general, like a lot of the library is, I deliberately make the photo look a little bit too dark because it's easier to bring up the shadows nowadays than it is to bring back detail in the whites or the very light areas. Like I was explaining before, that woman's blonde hair, I could not bring the detail back. And before, photos used to be super noisy when there were too many shadows, but nowadays things are getting so good with technology that the best plan really is to expose to be a little bit darker and then pull up the shadows later. Because otherwise the data is gone forever. If something is blown out like the blonde hair. That is just completely lost data that you'll never be able to bring back, even with editing down the line. And now I'll show you some examples from the wedding. So as I was telling you, this is during the ceremony where it was pretty dark, but there were these bright lights coming from one side of the courtyard. You know, when you're in the moment, you don't know exactly where to stand, and it was such an intimate moment that I didn't want to be running around bringing a lot of attention to myself, so I had to be really strategic about my movement and just like where to stand. As we can see, I started off on the left side where I was getting the groom's face, but there wasn't a whole lot of light on him. Most of the time in weddings, this is just my own thought process, but it could be wrong. Usually the brides care more about good photos of them than the grooms care about good photos of themselves. And so I was prioritizing the bride after this, seeing as how the light was on the groom. And so I switched sides, but there was another problem. Most of the time during the ceremony, there was a huge shadow on her face. The way the light was angled, the groom was blocking part of her face. Obviously, I can't tell them, oh, step this way or face your body this way. I didn't want to interrupt this intimate moment. And so really, I'm like a hawk, just watching every single move, every single moment, waiting for him to step a certain way so then the light can catch her entire face. So the top photo is an example of what it looked like most of the time. And then the bottom photo was, there were a couple moments where I was able to get it so her face was fully exposed. But as you can see on her dress had lots of shadows, and that made it incredibly difficult to edit as well. Another example of the shadows on her face and then the face being completely exposed. Also, again, notice the shadows on her dress. And as we can see on the right side, some of the whites in her dress are blown out. For me, personally, this was totally worth it because of how well exposed her face is and the rest of the scene is. And another thing that I'm going to just briefly touch on is you might be so focused on what they're doing in the right moment that you might forget about trying to get different angles of the scene. So this is just an example of pretty much the same exact scene, but just how in the left side, my whole body and camera were coming from the bottom, shooting up, whereas on the right side, my body is, I think, standing fully straight up, and that makes for a completely different photo. So it's always good to play around with different angles because you never know what you'll get. So after the ceremony, the bride's and groom's families wanted to take photos together. And instead of getting my flash out, this was a moment for me to use those really bright lights that were coming from the one side of the courtyard. And so I think my flash was sitting off to the side somewhere. And so I just made use of these really bright lights. So this was right after the ceremony and kind of some really sweet, cute moments between them where they're walking up the stairs. These lights were super, super bright, lots of shadows, but I think more what they care about, besides being technically correct, is getting these little adorable moments. They were really happy with the photos, so that was definitely very good to hear from them, that positive feedback. This was kind of an artistic shot where I was framing them between the marble. For this wedding in particular, it was so important to me that I actually made a whole document of example photos that other photographers had took, just to kind of have everything planned out and have the ideas in my head before being in the moment. In the moment, I really wanted to be focused on getting the lighting right and the technical piece versus the artistic shots and trying to be creative. So now we're going into, I think this is the study room or the reading room or something like that. And this was a lot of fun. And I was so spoiled with this couple because they wanted a full photo shoot. They were completely taking their time. All of their family and friends were downstairs just mingling and waiting for them. And they were just making the most of having this beautiful space to ourselves. And it really paid off. And as you can see in this photo, there are a lot of different lighting situations going on. There are bright white lights coming from the right side. There are the lamps all around. So this photo was pretty challenging to edit and time consuming, but in the end, I think it came out how I wanted it, and it was definitely worth the time put in. This is just another example about, placing your body in all different places around the scene, because you never know what you'll get. It would have been very easy for me just to kind of stand where I was with, where they were, the photo on the right, and kind of get those closer up moments. But I decided to see what it looked like going all the way back. And I was not disappointed. I would have never thought that I would have got these amazing reflections of the light on the floor, but I just played around and it ended up coming out really nice. Some other examples of that. And I did edit these photos individually, so as I was saying, it was very time consuming, but totally worth it. Now we're going to go into another room that was very, very difficult to edit in. This room, you will not believe what it looked like in the raw images before this. They literally looked brown. It was pretty dim in there. I believe most of the lights were tungsten. The difference is night and day between what this looked like before and how this ended up. So if you want to see a full session on editing in this difficult type of lighting, I'm happy to do that. Definitely get in touch with Paul or leave a comment if you'd be interested in that. And this is kind of showcasing more of the scene. Originally how this came out was, as I was saying, it was so dark. What I was really focused on in the editing was bringing out the details in both of the people and the subject, and seeing the details and the shadows in her dress so it's not blown out, but also not too dark because it is white and we want her to stand out because she is the bride. I wanted to make sure the details in his suit were also coming out. So as an example, the wrinkles in his suit, around the shoulder area, that kind of adds a little bit of depth to him. Another part of why this was so technically difficult to edit is because I wanted to bring out the art. The whole point of being in this room is really the amazing art. I actually had to go in and brighten up all the art and add some contrast in the back. There were also some things in this photo that I edited out completely, which I'm not sure if you can notice it now, but there was like a pole and like certain other things that were just kind of distracting. And here's another one that I absolutely love because of the expression on her face and the expression in his face. I will say that because I shot without a flash, I was respecting the art. They always say do not take photos of original art like in museums and things like that. And so I did not use a flash for this. And what ended up happening was, I think overall it's very great. I'm really happy with this photo, but as you can see, if you look really close around her arm and the hand, there is some fringing. Basically, it was detail that was really hard to bring back in her skin tones. Overall, it was worth it, but if I were using artificial lights, I think I could have just brought this whole thing to a whole other level. So that's always the goal, right? To get better with each photo shoot, with each wedding, with each event. So it's always good to reflect and think about what you would do better next time. Just in general, I would say that if your shutter is wide open, then it's likely that you will be able to reduce that chromatic aberration or the fringing. But I wanted to capture the whole scene. I wanted to make sure all of the art in the back was also in focus as much as possible. So I didn't really have this option. That's kind of a trade-off that you'll have to make. And maybe as technology goes on, you won't have to make that trade-off. You can have both. But for me, that trade-off was worth it to get that art in the background and have a little bit of fringing. And this is an example of the really great lighting in the hallway. There were some really bright lights that were flattering most of the time, but they also created some shadows. Overall, though, that hallway of the Boston Public Library has amazing lighting. This is her coming out of the Abbey room with the amazing paintings. This is her favorite room, and she didn't even tell me that until like halfway through the photo shoot in that room. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is so important that I got like really good photos of her and then photos of her coming out of her favorite room. So looking back, I would probably ask the bride and groom during an intro call or right as we start the wedding, is there a favorite like room or space that we really want to make sure that we have amazing shots in over any other space? And this is them going back down to the reception to meet their friends and family. And I took this as a really great example to use my wide angle lens. Weirdly, I tried to straighten this photo out as much as I could so you could see the top part. The marble I had straightened out, but the stairs are still a little bit crooked. So I have a feeling that this thing was built a little bit crooked. The wide angle lens sometimes does stretch out things on the side. So it does seem a little bit warped, but overall, I really love this photo and just the grandeur of the whole scene. Now, I was literally running around from the couple to the reception, the people waiting. And so I got some shots getting people warmed up to get photographed. This is the first time where I really started interacting with the guests during this event. And as you can see, this room was extremely orange. Like the color theme was orange, literally. But the lights around the stage were very blue. And so the photo on the left is where they're looking inward, where the lights are very shining on them, very orange. And as I was saying before, they look super mushy, pixelated a bit. It's a nice moment, but technically it's not really the type of photo that I would want to share with people. Now, the photo on the right, though, I'm standing with the stage lights to my back, and his face is towards the stage. And so he gets those nice kind of neutral, more bluish toned lights on his face. So technically, this photo is just so much better, and it's a matter of stepping like 10 feet toward the stage with my back turned around to get something like this. So again, just moving around, playing with the light, and just seeing what the different options are. And this was a great moment for me to kind of get a feel for this room before the couple entered. And here at the top left, you can see this is the couple entering the room. Everyone's cheering. It was a super fun moment. They're walking over to do their first dance. We have the father of the bride down in the right corner. He is giving a speech, and I wanted to kind of get like a different perspective of people sitting at the table. Not just the father giving the speech, because not only is it about him giving the speech, but it's between everyone in the room kind of bonding over this special moment. So now I'm going to fast forward to the dance floor, and I wanted to point out that event photography can actually be a lot like nature photography. It's all about waiting for the right moment. So this is the bride and groom on the dance floor, and you can see because the lights were changing so quickly, this was just from 1 second to the next, where, there's a lot of red on his hair and his face versus kind of more neutral. Honestly, I wouldn't say either of the photos are better than the other. I both think they're kind of interesting. But if I was going to be a little more technically on point, I would say the more neutral photo on the right. And these are just some photos that I was taking as I was starting with my camera here for the dance floor. They're a little more technically correct. I just wanted to make sure I got as many really great portraits as possible before I started getting into more of the experimental photography, because I've always seen these really amazing photos of people, on the dance floor with the lights, with the shutters dragged. So you have the lights that look like headlights from cars or something like that. And so I was just playing around with the speed of my flash versus the speed of my camera, and I was able to come up with some pretty interesting photos. And so, as I was saying before, if you wanted to see me edit a wedding live, we could maybe do that down the line. But now I'm going to get into more of the uncontrolled chaos. So even with the wedding, as chaotic as it was, the lighting that was still a lot more controlled because most of the time I was using my flash. But for concert photography, it's a little bit different. I cannot go tell the stage manager or the set designer to change the lighting. I just have to work with what I have. So this is the band called the Heavy Heavy. They have an incredible retro cinematic sound. They're one of my current favorite bands. For concerts, when the lighting, when it hits right, it's just amazing. It makes it super fun, super easy. Just capturing the energy. Basically, if you think of it like a data science, the data is good, the signal is strong, but if you ever shot a concert before, you would know that this happens maybe like 5% of the time. Everything is really unpredictable, so you kind of just have to roll with the punches and hope to make up for it later in post-production. As you can see, there was definitely like a very heavy pink theme for this. She also had lightly pink hair, and I'm not sure if the pink lights with her pink hair was supposed to be like an artistic choice for their shows or if that's just kind of how it ended up. But overall, even if they're pink, I still think it came out really cool. I started off in the front of the stage with my wide angle lens. It was a pretty small venue, but the wide angle lens that I had was perfect. And I will say, just a little bit of a side note, there was someone in the front that was very angry that I had a camera on my hands. And of course I did have like permission from the band. I had the badge and everything, but this guy, for some reason, he was not having it. He wanted to be front and center. But you know, in that type of situation, you kind of just have to stand your ground because, you know, the band is expecting that you are capturing their show. So for pink lights, you really want to focus in Photoshop on the mixer or the HSL panel to kind of play with the tones and the color. I would probably drop the luminance a bit because they're not only bright lights, but they're super saturated. So you want to just dim it down a bit, maybe shift the hue a bit, and you can actually get pretty creative with what colors you end up choosing, but I wanted to make it more lifelike, like how I saw it in the show. Here's one of my favorites that I find to be a pretty creative shot. This is quite edited, but I would say the raw does look pretty similar to this, kind of with like this dark background. And as a creative choice, I did keep these little lights and bokeh very subtle in the background just to give it some depth or to show that it is a real photo and not just some like cutout from a photo. I went all around the room as much as I could. I got some really great photos of even the drummer, which usually the drummer is kind of forgotten about. After I got the shots of all the band, then I started going more granular with the details of the show. And I went kind of behind the stage, really wanted to show what it was like kind of from the band's perspective, which you don't normally get that kind of thing when you are looking at concert photography. And I picked this photo to show you just to show that the light did eventually change. It wasn't pink the entire time, which is great because, you know, it's good to mix it up a bit and have something that's more technically correct. Because they were wearing white shirts, I was trying to get that white as close to real white as possible, which really helps with editing. Now, if they were wearing like blue shirts or some other green or another color, purple, it would have been more difficult to figure out what the true white was. So that's just another tip. And this is another shot that I think is kind of interesting from behind the stage. I wouldn't say it's necessarily very flattering of her, but I would say overall, it was just kind of an interesting angle that I got. And you can see from their angle, there's a lot of lights looking out towards the crowd, so that was fun to capture. So now I'm going to switch gears into my live photo editing session. I wanted to go over this because I was actually an intern at the Seattle International Film Festival in 2017 and was chosen out of all of the interns to photograph the Aubrey Plaza opening, which was probably the most known celebrity at the time in the whole film festival. And so I was honored to be chosen for this event. At the time, I was not confident with Flash. So upon arrival, this is what the photos looked like. We were shooting inside a movie theater. My camera wasn't the best. I would say it was a mid-range. It was not like a fully professional camera. And so I did my best with editing, but it wasn't great. So now I'm going to show you what it looks like, the before and after of editing this kind of thing. Hey everyone, so here is the photo gallery from the Seattle International Film Festival from 2017. These are the final edited images that I sent off to the team and they posted to the website. This was really the best I could do at the time, given my equipment and the editing technology at the time. So we'll just flip through what the final images looked like. You can see that there is a bit of a yellowish orangey glow here, and if I were to have made this a true white, then the rest of the background would have been, I think, too blue. So I was really just trying to do whatever I thought made them look the best, and nowadays we can actually go really specific with editing, like you can do the eyes or the skin tones, just the face, things like that. But back then we didn't have that. We had to do that manually. For this type of event, there is a very fast turnaround time because, of course, after this happens, they want to get the photos out for the press and everything to kind of just drum up the attention. So I'll go through these real quick. So for this photo, the screen that was really bright was facing the audience. So this actually didn't come out too bad, but you can see towards the back here that there is a lot of noise. You can see here there is a weird color cast that looks a little bit yellowish, greenish. And you can see as well here on the screen there is some fringing, or that chromatic aberration I was talking about. And here is Aubrey Plaza with her late husband. They were just hanging out outside the theater, and I felt creepy at the time because I was just kind of staring at her trying to get the right moment, and I think she noticed me. But I'm sure she was used to that. It wasn't as big of a deal to her as it was to me. And I'm not sure why the team at the Seattle International Film Festival cropped them this way, but I wouldn't have cropped them like, really long like this, but I guess they were just trying to focus on the subjects here. But you can see there is that fringing up here. It should be black, but it almost looks like a blue with the light that's coming through from the screen. This one is really a disaster in terms of the noise. Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, these were the photos that this one and the next one I cared the most about, and they really did not come out well. If I had a flash, this would have been completely different, but I did not have a flash. I was not comfortable using a flash at the time, and I regretted it. And this was probably the best one that I got, and the most important one. Again, they did kind of a weird crop, but it's not that far off from what the actual photo looked like. But of course, you would want to be able to see the branding in the back, but that's kind of really dark and muddy in the shadows. So I will fix that up now with the new technology that we have in Lightroom. This is what it looked like coming out of the camera. So I was doing my best not to overexpose his shirt, which, because there was a light coming from this side. And this, of course, is a total disaster. Normally, I wouldn't want anyone to see this because it's just not even really a usable shot in my mind. Pretty self-explanatory, really dark. You can see the noise here. This one didn't take much editing, so that's fine. You can see that the original one from this shot, there actually is less noise. But because I brightened it up a bit before it brought out the noise, but and this one of course is very dark. The eyes are just in the shadows. So we are going to start with this one, the most important one. So what I see here is there's a big difference between the foreground subjects and the background. And so I'm going to edit each of these individually. And even each of the people individually, because the lighting is slightly different on the people. Like his shirt is bright, whereas her dress is not so bright. Her dress seems to, with this lighting, have some sort of a yellowish, greenish tint to it. But with the correct lighting, you'll see it looks completely different. So just to start, let's bring up the exposure. And if you hear any sort of whining in the background, my dog is trying to play with this cat that I just brought back from Puerto Rico. If anyone's looking for a cat, I will bring him to your doorstep. He's very sweet. We just didn't want to have him go to a kill shelter there. So I'm going to bring him to a shelter here pretty soon. So I guess this is a good starting point because his shirt is starting to get a bit blown out. Of course, you probably know that what's most important is that this histogram becomes as even as possible. So you can see right now that it is skewing dark. So it is a little bit more dark and shadowy than we would like. But what I'm going to do now is individually edit each of them. Well, maybe to save some time, I will do I'll do one mask that has both of them in it. So I'm going to bring out the highlights down just a little bit, but I think what's most important is to locally do that on his shirt. And bring up the shadows. Her hair looks pretty dark in the photo, but it was pretty light in person. Because I think she got her hair colored, but just the way the shadow looks, it looks super dark up here. And what I really want to change immediately, just because it's distracting, is the color cast. So let's see, I'm going to go with the whole photo, just bring down the yellows a bit. Okay, so that looks a little bit more natural. Actually, I'm going to bring up the shadows for the whole photo as well. Now I'm going to go in individually. So I'm creating a subject mask for Aubrey. And we'll just start with the entire person, and then I'll go in individually for the clothes and the hair. So I'm again going to bring up the shadows a bit. You can see her hair lights up a bit. And you can also see the color of her eyes a little bit now. She normally has kind of like light brown eyes, which I am now bringing out her natural beauty a bit more. And because I brought the shadows up so much, you can see now that the noise is really starting to come out. But I also think that her dress looks really green because The whole thing looks a little bit green, but you can see, especially when you're looking at the blacks, instead of it looking like a black, it looks like kind of a greenish black. So that's a good way to tell that there is still a color cast. So I will bring up the magentas just a bit to try to get that black to look a little bit more natural. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. And I'm not worrying about the noise right now because I know that it can be fixed. I'm just kind of focusing on the colors and the shadows, the overall exposure. Also, a good way to tell is the teeth. Are her teeth, she would normally have bright white teeth. Are her teeth looking white? I think they look pretty natural. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with how she looks, with the exception of, I still think her hair is has a little bit too many shadows there, so going to brighten that up a little bit. And I'm not going to bring up the exposure because I just think it's going to make it look too unnatural. Maybe bring it up just a tad bit, but not very much. And then for the shadows for the top part. And you can see as well the background, the shadow in the background. So the software thinks that this is part of her hair. So that's something to pay attention to later as well. You can always try to clone stamp or airbrush this back so it looks like the background again. But I'm not going to be worrying about that right now. Doesn't look like I'm doing much unless I put it all the way. So that's good. I wouldn't normally really want to go beyond 20, around 20, like that. So I'm pretty happy with how she looks at this point. Just do another take. And with AI, it'll be easier, after I do the denoise, it'll be easier to look at the colors because the noise is so distracting. Now I'm going to move on to him. So what I'm seeing immediately is this very bright white shirt as well as the shadows up here on the side of his face and his hair. So let's take care of the shirt first. Also, you can see that he's a little bit more yellowish greenish tinted compared to her now. So I'm going to try to make it so it looks like they have not the same skin tone necessarily, but just the same type of hue. Like they look like they have the same lighting on them. Okay, so this looks a lot better. We can bring back the detail in his shirt. And there is just still a difference though because it's so bright here and there's so many shadows here. So we'll see what it looks like when we bring up the shadows. I would say that looks pretty good. And I would maybe add a little bit of contrast to his shirt, but because it's so bright, I don't want to use contrast. I want to just add back in the blacks. So that looks pretty good. And actually, I'm going to do the same with her dress, just to make the colors pop a little bit more and to make this black look like more of a true black. That looks pretty natural. So I will move on now to his face and the hues and all that. Actually, I'm going to do the whole body and the facial skin and the body skin just so everything is even. Okay, so this is a little bit too much. Let's say that looks pretty good, but I still think he looks a little bit, oh, it's hard. It's kind of hard to see. I still think he looks a little bit on the greener side. So I'm gonna add back in a little, just to give him some color in his face. Just very subtle. I think that looks pretty good. And the other thing that I would like to do real quick is his hair. I am editing hair all the time. I don't know about you guys, but this is definitely something, especially when there are bright lights right above people in certain types of venues. A lot of times when the light is right above, it completely blows out the hair, so you have to bring back in the detail. And for blonde people or people with white hair, that can be pretty tricky. So sometimes I'm even exposing for the hair just to make sure that the detail isn't lost. In this case, it's the opposite problem. His hair is a little bit too dark. So I am bringing up the shadows. You can see now that he has more... His hair is kind of blonde. Or, you know, it's not dark brown for sure. But, okay, so now this is what it looks like with the shadows. What would happen if we just try the exposure? So that looks pretty good. If I just bring up the exposure a little bit and then bring up the shadows, I would say that looks pretty good. We're not going to get it perfect, and it definitely still looks kind of green. So now I'm going to add back in this purple, or I mean the magenta. Still not looking great. I think that looks a lot better. At least it's not super distracting. It's not really something that people would be pointing out. And I could get crazy with this. I could make, like, her eyes whiter, like the eye scleris or whatever it's called. But for this purpose right now, I am nearing the finish line. I want to finish the background, though, because the background is still way too dark. Now it's really popping. Okay, so we have the exposure up. Let's see what happens when we bring the whites up. We want to make it look like there actually was a flash as much as possible, without it getting to look kind of like they're cutouts with a random background pasted onto the background, because that's something that can happen as well. Kind of looks unnatural, but see, it looks a little bit unnatural just because the background's so light and her hair is still dark. So I'm actually going to go back in and add more, or I should say, add more light to her hair, because it's still looking a little bit too dark. I think that's fine. We're not going to get perfect. Obviously this was a very difficult lighting environment. We're not expecting perfect. We're just expecting it to be a lot better. So I'm going to add some contrast into the background. Still not very much contrast. I really want these to be black because that's how they appeared naturally, but this contrast slider is not really doing it for me. So I am going to bring the blacks down. That looks a lot better. But it still looks really yellow, so I'm going to now bring the exposure up a bit more and the whites up a little bit more. You know, I still think now that I've brought the background out, I'm thinking they look a little bit too dark. Especially her. I still think she looks a little bit too dark. So I'm going to see what I can do without it looking unnatural. See if we can bring her exposure up a bit. Oh, wow. Yeah, looks like she has some flash on her now. Let's see what happens when we add some in for Jeff. Okay, so I don't have a whole mask just for him. Okay, that looks quite a bit better. And now I'm still seeing the shirt. That's still distracting me. So I am going to go back in here, bring the exposure down for his shirt. That looks a lot better. The details back in the shirt. The shirt hue, though, this looks a little bit green. So I'm going to add back in some magenta. That looks pretty natural, I would say. Okay, so the background, though. Now I'm jumping around now, but the background is still looking too yellow. So what I'm going to do now is actually just take out some of the yellow. Bring this slider down. Okay, so that definitely looks more natural. It's still a bit muddy over here. So I'm going to bring the whites up a bit more. But you can see over here it's getting pretty overexposed. So I'm going to bring it up as much as I can without this area becoming overexposed, because for this purpose I'm not going to be doing many specific editing. I'm not going to be doing much more editing to this, but sometimes what people do is they actually have to edit the background, but we're not going to go there for this session. Okay, so I'm thinking it looks pretty good, but I do want to bring the blacks back down a bit. And the shadows up. Okay, that looks a lot better. The shadows up. And the highlights down just for this area. I mean, of course it affects this whole area, but this specifically is what I'm doing the highlights for, just so it's not blown out. And the blacks back down. And because it still looks a bit green, I'm going to add in some magenta. I would say I'm pretty happy with this. I would say I could keep fixing things if this was like something that, if it was a job nowadays that I had to get to the press, if it was a job nowadays that I did and I was getting this to the organization to send to the press, I would probably put a little bit more time into it, but just because we need to move on to some more photos, I would say I'm pretty happy. Now here is the magic. Here is why you should never delete your raw photos. So we have denoise, and we can actually adjust the amount because when we get to a certain level of the denoising, it starts to look a little bit like AI. But for this purpose, let's just press it and see what happens. Okay, this I think looks really great. Now, their skin looks flawless, and I think this has to do with the AI, and some people actually may prefer this look. I do think that they look a little bit AI generated, but honestly, I don't hate it. I think they look really great. Oh, here's another thing that I would probably click on. Remove chromatic aberration and enable lens corrections. That's something I do for all of my photos. So you can see the difference so they're not so warped. His head actually looks longer with this, which I think it looks a bit better without the correction in a way, but I'm just going to do this because this is how I think it's supposed to look. And I'm going to bring the denoising down just a little bit so it looks like a little bit less like AI. So about 20%. If I were to post this on social media, I don't think anyone would do a second take thinking that this looks like AI. But if we're going to pixel peep, I think it does look a little bit. But for this purpose, I'm extremely happy because we can see what it looked like before, right? This versus this. I mean, it's just day and night between, it's really the difference between what you would expect a professional photographer to put out versus an amateur photographer. This internship was awesome because we did shoot in movie theaters a lot, and it was kind of a boot camp for getting good at shooting in difficult lighting situations. So I am forever grateful that I was hired to do this internship. It was unpaid, but it was completely worth it for my own career and happiness. Now the next photo, I'm not going to go through them all too much, but the next photo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the settings because I don't want to start from scratch. I just did all that work. I'm going to copy the edit settings from the one that we just did. And I will pick all of the ones that I would like. I'm not going to do the masking because those are local adjustments and the masks would be completely different for the other photo. But for everything else, I would say I would like to copy that over. So that was copy, and now I am going to paste that, paste edit settings, or Control V or Command V. So this looks pretty good. Because I copied over the settings, the denoise feature was added right away. And honestly, it is more fun to edit with that feature just because noise is not the most pretty. So what I would do is, this is super overexposed here compared to the rest of the image, but I'm just going to look at the overall image right now. I would say this is a pretty good starting point, and it looks super green, so I'm going to bring down the greens and add more magenta. Now we can see the lighting. There are multiple light sources coming from different areas, so it will be absolutely impossible to get this background to look even in terms of the colors. This is a photo where I would definitely edit the background to get this to be consistent. But let's make that the local masks. So I'm just going to go person by person. Oh, that did all three of them. Well, we can definitely bring up the shadows for all three of them. But, and maybe add some contrast for all three of them. So I'm just going to add in blacks because they already are pretty light. We can see this looks really nice and black. Pretty happy with that. But let's start with Aubrey real quick. Her hair again is a little bit dark. And she looks super orange, so we will add some blues in. And let's see. Of course, it looks a bit green here. She does have an olive skin tone, so I would say I'm pretty happy with how this looks. We can check the teeth. The teeth look a little bit yellow. So if we're just going to go by the teeth, we could add a little bit more blue in. Of course, we can do that individually, just the teeth by themselves, but I would say that is a pretty good starting point. And let's do her hair real quick. So her hair, as we could see, looks pretty green, so we're going to add some pink into there. And that looks pretty good. Wow, still looks pretty green. It's not going to be perfect. Now it almost looks a bit pink. Very, very tricky stuff here. I'm actually, for the hair, I'm going to add in some yellow just because that is the natural color of her hair for the highlights as she got her hair done. So I want it to look as true to life as possible. Now he definitely has a yellow tint on him. So let's real quick edit him. First, let's bring up the shadows, bring down the highlights, and add some blues in there. I would say I'm pretty happy with this, with the exception of his face still looks like it's in the shadows. So I will do that individually, just to brighten up the face just a little bit. And now for Jeff. He looks really orange. So they're actually not, I say they, I mean Lightroom is not seeing him as an individual subject for some reason, which actually that is a bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is use the brush, and through the brush setting, I think I might be able to get him as a subject. Actually, I'm sorry, not the brush. I would say the object tool, because that way I don't have to do the actual brushing myself. I'm just kind of getting the general area and hoping that the program will find him as one of the subjects. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start with his shirt. I'm going to bring the whites down a bit. Actually, I'm going to start with the exposure. That actually doesn't look good. I'm going to have to do these individually, but for now I will bring the shadows up a bit. Looks pretty good. And I will bring, let's see. Yep. Bring in the yellows down just a bit. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to have to use the object tool again for his shirt. And bring that exposure all the way down. And you'll see now there's a really weird shadow here. Basically what I want to do is bring it down enough, but not so much that you can really see that weird shadow. Otherwise, I'd have to do a lot of editing. So that's pretty good. I don't think most people would actually notice this weird squiggly line on his arm. I'm noticing that the subjects do not pop. I think they could use a little more contrast. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm also noticing that, so this is a black lanyard, right? This looks a bit green. So for this guy, I am going to add back in some magenta. You can see the difference here. So this is how it was. And now it's starting to look a bit more like closer to what it would look like in real life. And actually, I will add some blacks in. blacks in there. We don't expect this to be completely black because the lighting is hitting it so much, but I think that's pretty good. I still think that his face is a bit dark. A lot of this is just trial and error. Now it's getting to be a bit too bright, but I think that's good. Bring up the exposure, bring up the shadows. Now for Jeff and Aubrey, I think they could each use a little bit more of a punch in terms of contrast. So because this is already so bright, I'm just going to add some blacks in. And his hair's getting pretty dark now, but we can individually fix that. Just bring up the exposure a bit and bring up the shadows a bit. That looks pretty real true to life. So it's not perfect. I think his blue shirt and his blue shirt should match a little bit more. I don't think their blue shirts, I don't think the hue in their blue shirts are as different as they are looking in the photo. So I'm going to go back to Jeff's shirt a bit. Actually, I'm going to go back to his whole thing and make it a little more blue. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go onto the background, and this is going to be the last photo, but I think you get the idea. So exposure, definitely bring that up quite a bit. Shadows, bring that up quite a bit. The whites. And add back in the blacks. See, it's green over here. It's kind of an orangey, pinkish orangey over here. But we have to make a decision. Do we want to take out green and make this more pink? Or I think what the better idea is, try to get this part and this part more evenly, like actual white, and then surrender this area. And then if you wanted to go in locally and fix this up and make these the same, you could totally do that later. But let's see what it looks like when we add in some blue. Looks pretty blue behind him. But let's see if we could make it more white again. Huh, it's really shaping up here. Add a little more black again. So I think this is probably where I would end up. I could spend a little bit more time. Maybe I could get a little more of the shadows off of his face. Let's see what the shadows look like. Yeah, his face brightens up a bit more if I bring the shadows up. So when I do all that, of course, the shirt is bright again, so I'm gonna bring that down. Oops. Make sure that this is just the shirt. Oh, that's why. I didn't even realize that was the reason why there was this weird shadow. It's because when it selected the clothes, it didn't select the whole thing. But that is actually a super easy fix. We can just click the add button with the brush and then fix that up. Let's see what happens when we subtract. Actually, it is a lot easier to edit. Yeah, that's what I meant. You could see this. Actually, what I'm going to do is just delete this mask altogether. Not delete all masks. That will just undo everything I just did, but just delete mask 7. Now I'm going to create a new mask and see if it gets it if I do the object-oriented selection. Okay, and then I'm going to add, and I'm going to just try to get this whole area pink because it'll be a lot easier to see what I'm doing here. And you could get as granular as you would like with the selection. Usually I'm pretty picky about it for this purpose right now, though, and for time's sake, I will just call this good. So now we can make this look a lot better. Bring this down. Oh yeah, that looks so much better. Now you really see the detail in his shirt. And I would say, let's add back in the blues just a little bit. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this. I mean, I could continue working on it, but there's always a point where you have to ask yourself, is working on this more going to add any real difference to the final product? And the answer is, for this right now, I don't think so. And then this was a great shot. This one is pretty quick to edit. As you can see, it is super green, and so I would do is add back in some magenta. The shadows are just not great, but I would say even with just that, I would say it looks a lot better. We could go in and do like a mask for the subjects really quick. I would say even just that is fine if I'm going to be Trying to get this out pretty quickly. In this case, I think what's more important is the subject, showing that she was here, she spent her time presenting her film, and that is a little bit more important than the technicality of the shots. Now let's just use this denoise feature really quick, just so you can see the difference. Okay, that looks pretty good. And we see up here at the top, there is that fringing, the chromatic aberration. I could edit that out. I could also airbrush this to get it to be the same color, but I'm not going to get crazy. They actually edited it out, the staff of Seattle International Film Festival, just to show her. I kind of like that it adds some context, that this was just kind of a really fun moment, shared between people in the industry, but we could also crop it if we just wanted to focus on her. I think the people add a little more context, but this also is kind of just bringing attention to her emotion specifically. And there you have it. I think it looks a lot better. Yeah, I think that looks great. That is the end of my editing session. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free again to reach out. I hope you enjoyed that demo. Where this brings me now is this core philosophy of time capsule. So we just went from 2017, very pixelated photos that were pretty much a disaster, honestly a bit embarrassing, and it led to me feeling like a failure a little bit. I mean, there was another photographer there who got better photos, but they chose me and I felt like I kind of messed up. And so now, 9 years later, I'm able to redeem myself. And AI has really helped with these denoising algorithms, the sharpening tools, the upscalers, and they improve every single year. So I could even potentially make it better than what I just made it. I want to really stress that technology can get better. You can always improve things later. But that moment, that concert, that wedding, that red carpet event, that never happens again. And you can't go back to that concert or the party and try to reshoot it with a better camera. You only have one shot. Do not delete your data. Stop deleting your bad photos. Storage is cheap these days. Regret is expensive though. Keeping that data to let the future fix the noise is really what I'm trying to stress here. So some takeaways: don't fear the high ISO or the weird lights, the noise. Shoot so you have all of the detail in the whites, the white dress as an example, and you can bring up the shadows later. But you don't want to blow out that blonde hair or the white dress because you can't get that back. Archive everything. So your hard drive is like a wine cellar. The files get better with age. Another thing, probably the last thing I'll say, is just try to master the tools. It is worth it to take an hour to try to learn how to edit a photo properly with AI. It's just where things are going, and the options of how to recreate things now are pretty amazing for bringing detail back and saving photos that were otherwise a disaster before. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I hope that I really was able to teach you something about event photography. And definitely don't hesitate to add me on Instagram. I'll definitely add you back. It'd be great to connect. Or follow me on YouTube. I do some videos as well. Or if you're in the market for an event photographer, I will probably be around, so let me know. Thank you so much.
Take